Hi, I'm Fred Skaggs, retired pastor and marriage and family therapist. Nice to have you today. My subject today is right or wrong, how do I decide? My text is Romans 14, highlighting verses 13 through 21. Every time you make a choice, you're turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. C.S. Lewis said that, and he was absolutely correct. There are some things in this world that are unquestionably right. Justice, mercy, kindness, and love are right, always right, under all circumstances. Then there are some things which are unquestionably wrong: premeditated murder, deliberate lying, cheating, or stealing, under any circumstances, are wrong. My subject today, however, has nothing to do with either of these extremes. It deals rather with those things that fall in between those extremes, and this is the great majority of the problems we face in day-to-day living. The Bible largely is a guidebook which lays down principles of living, but it doesn't deal in specifics with everything that happens to us. It has much to say about honesty and dishonesty, but it has not a word specifically about cheating on your income tax. The Bible has much to say about Christ-like living, but it is silent on the question of viewing pornography on the internet. My point, of course, is that the Bible gives us many general guidelines about the choices we're faced with, but it doesn't deal with the issues that occur to us every day. It couldn't do that and still be relevant to every generation. How then are we to choose between right and wrong? T.B. Maston, the great ethics teacher, suggested some ways for living that are very productive, in my opinion, and choosing about right or wrong. He called them levels of living. Let's look at them. The instinctive level of living. A child is born with the urge to eat, drink, and play, and seek satisfaction for personal desires. We have no problem with that in a newborn or slightly older child. That's okay for the early years. But unfortunately, some people never move beyond that stage. There are adults who have never gotten past the instinctive level of living, where the primary motivation in their lives is aimed at seeking the satisfaction of their personal desires above all other things. They want what they want, and they want it now. They want no restraint on their lives. They often don't learn the discipline that's necessary to keep them from making poor decisions about such questions as, do I need this, or do I just want this? Can I afford this, or will I have to borrow money or use my credit card to get it? Are there other things that are more important to me at this time? Those who cannot handle these questions about material things also often have a problem when it comes to the moral issues of their lives, because they live on the same principle. Their response often is, I just want to do this, not, what is this action going to cost me? If I do this, what is it going to mean to me and those who are close around me? If you live by this philosophy of just doing what comes naturally, the instinctive level of life will suit you just fine. It will not be productive, but it will suit you. Then there's the customary level of living. This is the everybody else is doing it mentality. That charge is usually laid at the doorstep of youth. These people who live under that view that what everybody else is doing is a guideline for my life. Everybody else is doing it, why shouldn't I? How they dress, what cars they buy, how they spend their money, and how they live are frequently determined by what their friends are doing. I often hear remarks like, well, this is a different time from where we grew up. Well, what's that supposed to mean? I can tell you what it does mean. It usually infers that conformity with what other people are doing is the final authority for folks today. Well, it's not. The crowd can be wrong and frequently is. For example, sati is the practice of widow burning, in which a wife is cremated, burned on her husband's funeral pyre. In Hindu culture, this was once considered most virtuous, and such a wife was believed to go directly to heaven by this meritorious act. The custom was outlawed by India in 1829. But this cruel, inhumane custom still occurs, mostly in states of North India. Customs, whether in India or New York City, can never be trusted to determine moral decisions about one's behavior. We need to understand clearly that customs are habits, not moral guidelines, and they die hard. Then there's the conscience level of living. I hear people say, I trust my conscience to guide me in any decisions I make. Oh, really? Well, let's see what conscience means. The dictionary says it means a consciousness of the moral right and wrong of one's own acts or motives. So if your consciousness of right and wrong is conditioned by a lack of awareness of God's standards, then your conscience is not likely to be a very good, dependable way of choosing. Paul, a very devout Jew, before his Damascus Road experience with Christ, had a very high standard of morals. We know what they are, what they were. But Acts 9 tells us that he persecuted men, women, and children simply because of their Christian faith. Why? Because his conscience told him it was the right thing to do at that time. And he says that several times in his writings. Listening to your conscience is fine, provided that your conscience has been properly honed by God's standards, not your neighbor's. Then there's the Christian level. Of course, Christian principles are the first and final test for right or wrong. There are 6 ways of evaluating, in my opinion, decisions we make. Let me suggest them. First of all, what will this effect have on me? If I do this, what effect will it have on me? Will it harm my body? That's an important question. Romans 12:1 talks about that. How will it affect my spiritual life? Then, secondly, what effect will this have on others? Will this make me a stumbling block to others who may look to me as an example or who have great confidence in me? In our text today, Paul says that eating meat once offered to idols is no problem to him. He never thinks about it. But if one has come up in a tradition where there was a strong prohibition against it in their faith, then I'll forego eating that kind of meat so as not to offend them or make them uncomfortable in my presence. He was just being a decent, caring human being. There are always important questions like, if I do this, what kind of influence will it have on a weaker brother or sister? True, I can't be responsible for raising everybody in the world, but I can be responsible for not knowingly doing something that can influence another into an act or a lifestyle that's possibly harmful. Then, what effect will this have on the cause of Christ? Will this reflect well on the cause of Christ? If everybody was doing it, I wouldn't do something that would be insulting to my wife, nor should I if it reflects poorly on my Christian testimony. Then the test of secrecy. Would you be embarrassed if your best friend knew about this? Oh, I know. You don't need to answer to them for your actions, but if you're prepared to do something that you don't want anybody else to know about, you probably ought to forget it. At least you ought to question it. Then the test of universality. What kind of family would I have if everybody in it did this sort of thing? If it doesn't reflect well on them, then it probably will not reflect well on you. Then there's the test of prayer. Could I ask God to bless this while I'm doing it? Anything we cannot pray for help in, we ought not to do. An important decision we make should be bathed in prayer, any decision, even if it's not a moral decision. I ask people always, whom I marry, to pray over whom they're getting ready to marry. Some do, and sometimes God says no. Some don't like that, but it's always right. At first glance, one might think that these tests I've suggested would take the joy out of living. On the contrary, they will add to the joy of knowing that one's life is in the center of God's will and that they're making good decisions. There are many things in this world that are wrong, and what people think about it is totally immaterial. There are other things, however, that we may not be as clear on as we would like to be. It always pays big dividends to ask, what level of living am I on? And how does this particular matter look in light of the questions we've just suggested? Christians are people who seek to make Jesus Christ Lord of their lives as best they can. And it's imperative that we seek His leadership in every decision we make. It's important to remember, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. Choose God's way. It works. Amen.